Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. Yes, you recognize the voice. You know when you hear the Dentzel Domain, it's always me. I never have any substitute hosts. I never have any guests, although I've tried a little bit here and there, but you know what the truth is? It may just be that I just like talking a little too much and can't share the microphone, which should be no surprise, given that I was raised as an only child. So I don't share very well. Yes, I know that I talk about my two brothers and my sister, but that story is a little too long for what I want to get into today. But maybe that's just it. When I'm not here, the show just does not go on, and that's why Red State Talk Radio has to play repeats. I don't try to find somebody to do the show for me. I don't know. And it's just kind of funny. I just was thinking about that today. It's a beautiful day here in Madeira Beach, Florida. Just some of the, I know I said it yesterday and maybe even the day before, it's just some of the prettiest weather you could ever ask for in Florida. This time of year, March, April, a little bit into May, are the nicest days. And then in the fall, late September, October into early November, the prettiest times of the year for the weather and what you expect. Of course, in the fall, maybe you have to worry about a hurricane or something. But here in Tampa, we rarely have to worry about that. It's very much like Nevada, where I used to live, where the summer, although people think, well, we got to go to Florida in the summer, we go to Nevada in the summer, and it's nice and hot. And it is hot. And it's terribly hot. And granted, I think you get used to it. I got used to it in Nevada. I'm used to it here in Florida. But as I was talking with my friends who were down here this past weekend, you don't want to go to Disney World in July. People do. I mean, if that's all the time you can get off from for a vacation or something like that, of course kids are out of school and that it's most convenient, then that's the best you can do. But I've been at Disney World in July. It's no fun. It's no fun at all. Although if that's the only choice I had, then I'd go. Same way in Nevada, that if you're going there, people, of course, do go during the summer, and it's busy and everything. But I also know that people practically run from casino to casino because it's 115 degrees outside, and that heat will kill you. So in both cases, the March through May, September through November times are the nicest part of the year. And you could probably spread that out a little bit more in Florida because it doesn't get as cold here in the winter as it does in Nevada. But the summers, if you're planning to have a vacation where you're going to be spending time outside a lot, then maybe Nevada and Florida are not your best choices. Let's get to the show. Wisconsin went just about the way I thought it would. I know that there was that last-minute poll by ARG saying that Donald Trump had a chance of winning. I totally dismissed it. And now that we know what the results were, I know why. Ted Cruz got 48% of the vote. Donald Trump got about 48, and then 34% for Donald Trump. And then I think John Kasich got 15%. Out of that, I was reading that it looks like Ted Cruz is going to get about 33 delegates. Donald Trump at most is going to get, I think, 6 delegates. John Kasich, I don't think he's going to get any. And more John Kasich is looking like or feeling like that relative who comes to stay for a couple days and then you think they're never going to leave. You know what I'm talking about. Family comes in from out of town, maybe for Christmas, and they get there maybe December 23rd. They're there for Christmas Eve. They're there for Christmas Day, and then you get to December 26th, and you're ready to move on with your life. Have to go back to work. Maybe you have some other things you have to do. Maybe you're going to have a New Year's party, and still that relative is still there on the 27th, on the 28th. And then the relative starts saying, well, New Year's is so close. Maybe I should just stay through to like January 2nd or January 3rd. This is the kind of person John Kasich sounds like he is. He's not going to win any more states. I guess maybe in Pennsylvania. Maybe that's his best choice. There are a bunch of people like my brother Michael who plans to vote for John Kasich when the primary gets to Pennsylvania. A lot of people like him there. Maybe. But it's a little exasperating, and he's going to be the main reason that Ted Cruz isn't going to get close enough in the delegate count to really, really scare Donald Trump. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that Donald Trump is down deep, is a little afraid already, although he'll never admit that. But I think it shows in his talk about how Ted Cruz cheated in Wisconsin. The Trump campaign, I'm willing to look at any information you're willing to provide me about how he cheated in Wisconsin. It's always amazing to me. And this goes way back to Iowa when this all started. That here Donald Trump is portraying himself as being capable of everything. He wins at everything. He hires the best people. And still, it seems other people can get over on him, can outwit him, can fool him. That's a little funny. That's the only thing you can deduce from what comes out of the Trump campaign. Now, as you know, I don't think that Ted Cruz or John Kasich or any other candidate that has run has outwitted Donald Trump at all. I think they've mostly played by the rules, and I think it's just a bunch of incompetence on Trump's part, along with him and his campaign not knowing the rules, which is different than cheating. A couple days ago, I told you, all this delegate stuff, it does seem a little weird, but it's only weird because we've not experienced it before, not because they just wrote the rules a couple weeks ago. It's never been an issue because we haven't had a race like this. Now, see, on the Democrat side, I suppose I could talk about what's going on over there. Bernie Sanders wins Wisconsin pretty easily. They're kind of used to the delegate counts and the superdelegates, and as you know, they do their thing a little bit different than Republicans do. But still, they have their quirks. They have their weird rules. But I think your average Democrat who followed what went on in 2008 is not surprised by any of this. Because it happened back in 2008 that Barack Obama would get a certain percentage and then the delegates would be spread out, and it just seemed a little weird. And there was concern back in 2008 on the Democrat side whether either of them would get enough votes enough delegates to, sew up the nomination before the convention. So the Democrats, they've kind of been through this before. And frankly, this contest between Sanders and Hillary Clinton is not as close as it was between Clinton and Barack Obama in 2008. What's making it look closer, I think, this time around is that Bernie Sanders wasn't supposed to have a chance at all, but here he is still winning states 3 months into this. That's what's making it look a little closer than it is. I still don't think that there's going to be anything that gets between Hillary and the nomination, although on their side, it's going to be proved to be a very interesting convention on their side as well. Once again, if you're a political scientist and you need material to write about and talk about, 2016 is going to give you, you've hit the treasure trove. You've hit it. You can make your career for the next 10 years, 20 years, just writing about what has gone on just in these 3 months. And we're only halfway to the convention on either side. You're like a climate scientist 20 years ago. Wealth of material. So the Democrats, I think they're more used to these weird rules. And not that they accept it. Of course, the Bernie Sanders people are driven nuts by it, and the superdelegates and all the behind-the-scenes stuff. It seems to me that the Republican way of getting to the nomination and how these delegates get spread out, it's still very hard to understand, but on the Republican side, we don't have those superdelegates who are already preordained to vote a certain way before any votes are cast. But this is the way it is. And as I've told you, states pick presidents, people do not. It only seems like it. That's why we have an electoral college. And this delegate procedure on either side is very much like the electoral college that is used for the general election. Same kind of thing. You have to remember, regarding the electoral college, some of those electors sometimes have voted in a different way from what the people did in each state. This was kind of a safety procedure that the people who created this country put in there. Now, as we go further, for example, on the Republican side, I think that Donald Trump is going to win New York pretty easily, but I don't know how many delegates he's going to get. I think he's going to underperform compared to the prediction of what he would do a month ago. And in fact, if you go back far enough, you can find polls in February that said that Donald Trump would win Wisconsin. Of course, that wasn't even close to the case. But, what I don't understand about this cheating that allegedly Ted Cruz did, and he cheated to win Wisconsin, and he's a cheater. What has happened in the last month is pretty much what we expected. Going back to February or even January. Now, did we know it was going to be Ted Cruz? Maybe not. But the idea was that Donald Trump has this certain segment of Republicans, Democrats, independents, if those Democrats and independents can vote in the open primaries, and of course in the closed ones they can't. He has this certain group that loves him, and outside of that, he's going to have a hard time picking up any other people. And as the others, Carly Fiorina dropped out, and Jeb Bush drops out, and Marco Rubio drops out, and if you want to go further back, Scott Walker drops out, Bobby Jindal drops out, all of these people that naturally most of those regular people who supported those candidates would generally move toward Ted Cruz, whoever the anti-Trump person was. Now, once again, what has gotten in the way of this a little bit? John Kasich, because he keeps hanging around. So, is it still the fact that Marco Rubio still has more delegates than John Kasich does, even though Marco Rubio dropped out a month ago? I think that's still the case. That just shows you how whacked out John Kasich and his supporters are. And yes, I'm going to include anybody who votes for him from now on. But what is going on, it shouldn't be a surprise. Trump supporters should not get up today and say the reason that their guy is losing is because of cheating. The fact is, all of those other candidates' supporters have gone to Ted Cruz for the most part. Something that was written about for days, months ago. And it's Donald Trump's fault that he hasn't been able to pick up a lot of those people. He's picked up a few, maybe 10% of them, 15% of them. But the other 80% have chosen to go in a different direction. You know whose fault that is? That's Donald Trump's fault. And because if you remember, going back once again to middle of February, the idea was that one by one those candidates would drop out. Yes, Donald Trump would rack up a lot of wins at the beginning. New Hampshire, South Carolina. Yes, he surprised some people in the SEC primary with Alabama, Georgia, those places, Florida. But the idea was is as these other candidates dropped out, he would have a tougher time winning, especially getting to that 50% number, which he has not gotten in a state yet. I'll remind you of that. As much as he has won some of these states, he's never gotten over 50% of the vote, popular vote, in any of these states. Whereas Ted Cruz at least has gotten them in a few. For example, Utah. And the concern back a couple months ago was that will it be enough for all us never Trump people? Will it be enough? Will it happen soon enough that people rally around somebody who is the opposite of Trump to stop him, to slow him down, to slow his tallying of delegates up to the point where we can get to a situation like a contested convention where he is well short of that 1237 number, and then deals can be made to keep him out. And keep in mind, this is all within the rules. You know, it's just like baseball. My Pirates, by the way, won last night, beat the Cardinals in 11 innings. I loved it. But just like in baseball, people may not understand the infield fly rule, but it is a rule. It does exist. It does happen. You may not like it. You may not understand it, but it's still a rule. It exists for a reason, just like all of these rules in nominating a president or getting the nominee for each party exist. Complain all you want, but they exist. Now, it may be after this year that some of this gets retooled. Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. All I know is come 2020 or 2024, at least on the Republican side, there's probably going to be for the average person who's following this, there's going to be a much better understanding of how this all works. And it's safe to say that anybody who chooses to run in 2020, if it happens, in 2024, the candidates and the campaigns will also have a better idea of what needs to be done to tally up delegates. Whereas the truth seems to be right now on April 6, 2016, that nobody understands this delegate count better than Ted Cruz and his campaign. And it's the very reason that I think he would make a very decent president. The details. Details matter. And so as we continue forward, Donald Trump is probably going to win his state of New York. He probably has a good chance of winning Pennsylvania. But outside of that, who knows? And who knows how many delegates he's really going to be able to tally up. There's still some states that are going to be very nice Ted Cruz states. And what I expect to happen, and keep in mind, from now, Donald Trump at this point can do nothing but hurt himself. It seems people become less enamored with him election after election after election, after primary. To the point where nationally, he's now polling behind Ted Cruz just by like tenths of a point. And in a place like California, Ted Cruz continues to chop that lead down. The more Donald Trump appears in front of cameras and talks, the less people like him. So, just about went the way we thought it would. And on the Democrat side, Hillary loses Wisconsin by by more than single digits. I have it written down here in my notes. Here's what's clear. Who knows what's going to happen on the Republican side? But if it is Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, I can almost guarantee you that we are going to have the lowest turnout for an election, for a presidential election, in decades. Maybe in history. Maybe in history. And in fact, I would anticipate that the turnout percentage would be much similar to a midterm election, meaning a non-presidential year, than a presidential year. More people vote during presidential years than in non-presidential years. So 2004, 2008, 2012 were all high points for people turning out to vote. But in those 2006, 2010, 2014, people just don't, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle don't show up to vote. Well, I think the turnout will be much more similar to a midterm election this year if Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are the nominees. All right, just because you see how many people are turned off by both of them. Now, I don't know if Ted Cruz gets the nomination on the Republican side. I think that the numbers will be higher. I would still expect it to be a lower turnout just because of Hillary Clinton being on the other side. All right, I don't think that we will approach the number of people who voted in 2008, for example. Let's just put it that way. But we'll see. I just anticipate turnout will be very low. Let's move on to something else. And this kind of continues along the lines of Donald Trump and his supporters, is that and Jonah Goldberg wrote an article, what's he called it, the G-File this past week, in which I think captured this idea very well, in that with Donald Trump, these lies that he tells and this outrageousness that he tweets out and everything, these are all tests. And I happen to believe that. And it's testing whether Donald Trump knows it or not. It's like a test of his supporters. And you notice that you find very few. I know that a few have come out. We had that one person who was involved in the campaign from a couple weeks ago, a woman who came out and had that long article that got a lot of attention, what she saw behind the scenes. But the truth is that overall, his support has not diminished that much. How many Trump supporters, energetic, zealous Trump supporters, have really abandoned him since January? Not a lot. A few, not a lot. And so it's clear that they're going to ride him to the bitter end, and he can do no wrong. And he can dish out all that he wants. He can say anything that he wants. And they're still with him. And, it's one of those things where had he been doing this from the beginning, how many supporters would he have had? If from the beginning, going back to May of last year, if he had been tweeting stuff that is favorable to neo-Nazis and skinheads and white power people, would he have gotten the attention that he did? Would he have gotten the support that he did? If he was as wishy-washy on all these different issues the last couple months, would he have gotten all that support starting last year in May and June? I think not. And if this sounds like a familiar argument to you, it's the same argument I make regarding all of those conservative media pundits who have gotten behind Donald Trump. Had they done that with a candidate back in the early 90s when they were all getting started out in radio, TV, whatever they were writing, wherever before, of course, the internet existed, at least for the common man, would any of these people gone anywhere? No. No, they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have. But because they were already famous, well-known, had people under their spell, I guess you could say, that they've been able to move over and support this guy and seemingly get away with it. Now, we'll see. If Donald Trump doesn't get the nomination, he has to bow out however ugly he does it. We'll see where that leaves Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Bill Bennett and Ann Coulter and Laura Ingraham and all these other people. You know their names by now. We'll see where it leaves them. But had they supported a guy like Donald Trump 20 years ago, they'd all be nowhere. They'd all be nowhere. Likewise, had Donald Trump behaved this way when he started and been wishy-washy when he started talking about housing and education and healthcare as being some of the most important things the government can do, how many of those so-called conservatives would have jumped on his bandwagon a year ago? I'm hoping not many. Maybe I could be wrong about that. But how many regular people would have jumped on the bandwagon with him? Probably not as many. And maybe he would have gone through some of the debates. That stuff would have been brought up by Rand Paul and the rest of them, would have made him look foolish. And maybe Donald Trump would have dropped out before even the first primary, the caucus in Iowa ever happened. But being that he held it together for enough months talking about the wall and he's going to make Mexico pay for it, talked about immigration and all these things. Meanwhile, the rest of us knowing that he doesn't mean a word of it, but he put on a good show. Just enough to fool enough people. But if it had been wishy-washy like he is now, flip-flopping all over the place, I dare to think that a lot of his people would not be his supporters. They would have latched on to somebody else. I'm not saying they would have gone to Ted Cruz or Scott Walker, but they surely wouldn't have gone with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, the fame and the votes that he still is getting is a factor of people not willing to abandon him, showing me that still in the 21st century, too many people are caught up in hero worship and not willing to admit when their candidate has totally lost his mind. You know, it's gotten to the point where it's like an ego thing. We've all been there. We get into an argument with somebody and we're proven wrong. We don't want to change our ideas. We want to continue to, hang on to something that is obviously not true, but our ego can't stand it. We've all been there in politics and in other aspects of our life, work, relationships, hobbies. We've all been there. So they're doing a lot of that. And it could be a lot of the other people just love the spectacle of it. They love the reality TV portion of it. And you should know, I don't mind making fun of Trump supporters. I know they make fun of me. I see the tweets. I think all of us never Trump people. They make fun of us as much as we make fun of them. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. When I start hearing that we're not supposed to talk about Trump supporters, it reminds me of all those little delicate flower kids on campuses today who don't want to be confronted with conservatism, and they don't want to be offended, and they don't want to feel bad. That reminds me of your average Trump supporter out here in the real world. They're afraid to be talked about and made fun of. But it's fascinating. And I'm glad that Ted Cruz won last night, but I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
Red State Talk Radio, feeding the hunger.
Hey, this is Alfonso Rachel with PJTV, Zone Nation, and the founder and drummer of 20 Pound Sledge, and you're listening to RedStateTalkRadio.com, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
I'm a mom, and just like millions of other women, that's why I own guns. We're responsible, we're law-abiding, and we're everything that makes America strong. Every day, we're willing to use a firearm to defend our families. But the media will never tell those stories. If a mom puts a gun to the face of a home-invading thug and makes him run for his life, the story gets buried. But if she's unarmed and murdered, the cameras will be at the scene before the police. It's time for moms like me to speak out. We are the majority. We demand the freedom to defend our families, and we challenge the media to tell the truth about our rights. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
What does it mean for a country when its citizens turn on the news and expect to be misled? Because the reporters who once served as freedom's fearless watchdogs feel like distant characters in a fading memory. Today, too many journalists are just actors, playing to their boss's script. Why tell the truth when you can sell a lie for more? There's a price to pay for all this dishonesty. If the free press won't protect free people, it's our job to demand they do it. Do the work you say you do. Aim your First Amendment against hypocrisy and corruption like a hammer of the people. Kick down the doors of any leader who deceives us, and never tolerate dishonesty from your own ranks. That's what the good guys demand. We're the 5 million men and women in the National Rifle Association of America, and we will not play along. Join us today.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and if you don't go to bed every night absolutely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place, then you're simply not doing enough. Join me late night Tuesday, early Wednesday, 12:05 a.m. for Cowboy Logic Radio on RedStateTalkRadio.com.
We're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. Let's move on to something else. Talked about enough Cruz, Wisconsin, Trump stuff for one show, I think. I saw this story at triblive.com. If you don't know that site, that is the website for the Tribune Review, which is a somewhat conservative newspaper in the Pittsburgh area. And it is the competitor, its competitors, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And the Trib Review is a Richard Mellon Scaife. Of course, he's dead now, but is a Richard Mellon Scaife publication that he started there. Going back like 20 years now. And it just happens to be, not to brag, but the CEO of what the company is now called Trib Total Media. I know the woman. She went to my high school. She graduated 4 or 5 years after I do, but I do know her. All right, just for the record, just coincidentally. In any case, there's an article in there about this young girl, Kaylee McDowell, who died recently. She was 17 years old. She was either junior or senior at Woodland Hills High School in the Pittsburgh area, which is one of the biggest high schools. Woodland Hills has been around, I'm going to say, for about 20 years, 25 years. It was combined. A couple school districts got together to form this Woodland Hills. But she died. And there was an article on her on the front page, on the landing page of triblive.com. Now, why would that be? And it's unfortunate she died. She died of Crohn's disease, which has to do with your intestines and blockage and infection. Very unfortunate. Seems to me in reading the story, it was very sudden as well. It was like she was diagnosed like 4 months ago, and now she died recently. Why do you think that they put her on the front page of this website? Why? Well, mainly, you could say, is because she was a political activist. Mainly. She had gotten to meet Bill Clinton when she was like 8 years old. She couldn't wait to vote for Hillary Clinton this year. Of course, being 17, she would not have been eligible to vote in the primary in Pennsylvania, but maybe if she turns 18 before November, she was looking forward to voting for Hillary Clinton. And she was a political activist. She wrote a letter to Barack Obama as a young girl saying how important it is that young people get into politics, how important politics are, and young people should take it more seriously. And she was so well known for this, and and gotten some attention in the Pittsburgh area for being a young girl and being interested in politics, that on the day of her, I guess her burial, they had some service for her. The entire Woodland Hills High School was let out early, like at 1 o'clock, to attend this service. Once again, Woodland Hills, Quad A size school in western Pennsylvania. I'm going to say probably graduates 450 kids per class, something like that. I think Butler High School is still the biggest high school in the Pittsburgh area, I think, but Woodland Hills is up there. The entire school was let out to go to this girl's funeral. Now, granted, she was a cheerleader. She was popular and did those things that high school girls do. But I got to ask you a question. Does this story, and this is not a criticism of the woman who is a friend of mine that's the CEO of the company or the writer of this story or anything else, but does this girl even get any attention if she was a Cruz supporter? If at 8 years old she wrote Ted Cruz or met Ted Cruz, now I know he wouldn't have been a senator at that point. He would have still been just in Texas back in 2008. But had she managed to meet him somewhere and got a picture with him or wrote a letter to him once he became a senator from Texas or anything like that, would she have gotten any of this attention? Let me go further. In this article, there are quotes from some of her teachers talking about how great a student she was, how she believed in, let me read this, advocacy and policy making were Kaylee McDowell's passions. She wanted to grow up to be a lawyer. Now, I ask you once again, if she is a conservative and in whatever she did for her schoolwork, say she had to write an essay, and she wrote an essay how Ronald Reagan was the greatest president of the second half of the 20th century. From 1950 on, Ronald Reagan was the greatest president. All right? And the contract with America, with Newt Gingrich, was one of the greatest ideas, once again, in the last 100 years of legislation in the United States. And she bragged about, she thought George W. Bush was a great president and stuff like that. Would any of these teachers have said anything like this? Anything. I happen to believe not. All right, and you should know, once again, the Tribune Review is known as being a much more conservative paper. Its editorial pages, its stories are covered from a much more conservative point of view than the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is. The only reason I even go to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette site is for the sports. That's it. But here we have, in a somewhat conservative paper, a story about a liberal young girl. You have to keep in mind something. There are young women dying all over the United States from diseases. It's all unfortunate. It all sucks. No parent should ever see their son or daughter die. If I had omnipotent powers, if I was God, one of the things I would change is that parents always die before kids. I know, just from my experience with my parents, have several of their friends who have had daughters or sons who have died. Okay? Car wrecks, other issues, diseases. And it all sucks. So, why was this particular girl picked out for this particular story? Why? Because of her activism, because of her liberalism, because of her idea that everything can be fixed through government. Now, probably the ironic thing about this, if you really want to get down to it, as you know, I don't take young people's political ideas very seriously. I just don't. I don't. I think that there is something that goes along with growing up, getting older, thinking about how, you're getting closer to death than you are to the time that you were born, living on your own, paying bills, having a job. And I know a lot of young people do that. But when you start to see your friends around you getting married, and having children and having the financial issues like many do, it really starts to hone how you believe the world works. And so generally when it comes to politics, it's kind of like how I look at women. I don't look at a woman under 30 years old. I'm 45 years old. And I don't look at a woman under the age of 30. Okay, if I think she's under 30, I just could not be less interested. Same way kind of when it comes to politics. If some person who's out there is into politics, they're under 30, I'm glad they're interested. I appreciate their interest. I'll continue to maybe see what they continue to think in the future. But overall, I'm going to wait till they're like 30 to 35 before I start taking them seriously. That's just who I am. Now, in other things, if it comes to athletics, then yes, people under 30 are generally the best athletes in the world. Generally. But it's amazing what we've learned about the human mind, how it doesn't really mature until the age of 25, even though body-wise, we may be at the right height and we look like adults, but our brains are continuing to develop well into our 20s. But the ironic part, to get back to that, is that this girl displaying all these liberal tendencies, it very well may be 15 years from now that she's as conservative as I am. I think that has popped up in the last couple of years. There was a young black kid, what was he, 11 years old, 12 years old, was doing YouTube shows speaking out against Barack Obama. Remember all that from a couple years ago? I know I didn't talk about it on this show. Why? Because I didn't take it very seriously. And what happens? He just wakes up one day and says, I don't know. I'm not really that conservative anymore. I forget what age he was, but in a couple years he just changed from speaking out against Barack Obama to just being something else. And that's one more reason I just don't take young people's political ideas and opinions that seriously. Just don't. In fact, you could say one of the big problems that happened during the baby boomers, in fact, now that I'm talking about it, my buddy and I, my political friend and I, well, he's not just he's a very good friend of mine. Very good friend of mine from college. I call him my political friend because he's the guy that got me into politics, and I talk with him about politics more than anybody else. That's why. But we even talked a little bit about the baby boomer generation, and he brought it up. He said he was very proud of our generation, of Generation X generation that seems to be a little bit more conservative, seems to have their wits about them a little bit better than the baby boomers, which is the next generation ahead of us. I agreed with him on that. And I told him I think the baby boomer generation has been a disaster for the United States. A disaster. And I have 2 brothers and a sister that are part of that generation. But overall, it's been a disaster. Culturally. And then my friend went on to say that the generation after us, what would it, Generation Y or the millennials or whatever they're called, he's not too impressed with them as either. The jury's still out for me on that, but I can tell you that we went from the greatest generation to probably the worst generation, the baby boomers, and I think that my generation is somewhat better. But getting back to baby boomers, one of the problems that started with baby boomers is that we started taking young people much more seriously than we should. And of course, what I think about are the mid to late 60s, flower power, opposition to Vietnam, of course, the drugs that started, the drug use that came into the forefront during their time as young people, as teenagers into their 20s. Some of them never got away from it. All right? Free love, communal living, all of that became legitimate. And unfortunately, the generation, the greatest generation, those people who fought in World War II, for some reason, started being afraid of their kids, thought that we had to start listening to them or else. And that's what took us on this long road that we as conservatives have been trying to fight for decades. This cultural change of taking young people too dang seriously. And this is what I think of when I hear this story. I don't know this girl. I don't know her family. She might have been the nicest girl in the world. But here's what I know. The only reason she got covered on this story is because she was a liberal kook. Now, granted, like I said, young liberal kook, stars in her eyes. Who knows what she'd be like 15 years from now. But we all got to remember, you know what? There's a lot of conservative young people from conservative families who are dying just like this girl. And those kids aren't getting any attention at all. Maybe because they're not of the right political persuasion. This is one more reason that I give conservatives such a hard time about sending their kids to public schools. This is what you deal with. The truth is, if you want to get right down to it, for all of you conservatives who send your kids to school, the fact is the teachers love the liberal kids more than yours. More than yours. I'd also note that as much as liberals have a crazy time with religion and separation of church and state, remember all that? It's obvious to me that liberals have no problem canceling public school so everybody can go to the church service of a liberal. They only oppose oppose the separation of church and state when it's convenient for them. When it's not convenient for them, they lick kids out at 1 in the afternoon to go to a church service. Why? Because this young woman was a liberal, believed in the power of government of perfecting people's lives. That's it. Otherwise, she wasn't any more special than any other 17-year-old person that has died out there. Special to her family, but pretty much just an everyday girl to everybody else. But hey, you conservatives, you just keep sending your kids to public schools, and we'll see what happens. And it'll be up to the rest of us to try to turn those kids back 20 years from now when they've been brainwashed. We'll just keep at it. You just keep doing what you're doing. All right? Let's move on to something else before I go. Did you read this story? And this happened like a week ago or 10 days ago. Funny, I mean, not a funny story. Funny story, not funny story, if that's possible. Did you read this story about this two people, man and woman, in a car, in a sport utility vehicle? They entered the Naval Station Lemoore in Fresno, California. They were getting chased by California Highway Patrol for some reason. But somehow they made it onto this base. They got through security, blew through security. When I think of that, I think of like a James Bond movie or something. In fact, I think of the movie Octopussy, where James Bond is in that car in West Germany, and he has to get onto that base before the nuclear bomb goes off, and he just blows right past. He tries to stop at security, but then the security tries to stop him, get him out of the car, and he just blows right through security and gets in there. And that's the one where he turns into a clown, if you remember that from Octopussy. But in any case, this is what I thought of when I read this story. But these two people, they made it onto this base through security. If you don't realize, some of these naval stations, they're pretty large. They're not just a few acres. They're like square miles. Well, once they got past security, they went 7 miles. So they're flying. The police are chasing them. Let's say they're doing 80 miles an hour. So in 7 miles, you're going to be able to do that in about, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 30 seconds, something like that. So they're storming down this road on this base. Eventually, they get to a place. They actually get to the place where all the planes are parked. On the tarmac. There's an airport there. And they run into the back of a Hornet, an FA-18, which are known as the Hornets, or maybe it's a Super Hornet, and kill themselves. And of course, as you can imagine, the plane took some damages too. Now I ask you, how is this possible? Now, I can understand if, a couple people high on drugs, they pull into an army base and they just blow right by it. And then maybe in a mile they get stopped. Or maybe in 30 seconds they get stopped because of guns being fired at them. Or maybe there's barriers that popped up, or those spikes pop up on the road, or something like that. These people went 7 miles onto this base. That just shows you how big the base is. 7 miles, got close enough to a jet to run into it, and it wasn't the MPs or security or anybody else that killed them. It was they who killed themselves by running into this plane. I want to hear the investigation on how this happened, because it would seem to me, from the time they get onto the base to the time they hit that plane, it would be like I said, about 5.5 minutes if they're going like 80 miles an hour. Is that not enough time for, it's a naval station, so all these aviators or whoever else, the MPs, to get their guns out, get out there, maybe jump in a helicopter, track this person down? I mean, 5.5 minutes is a long time to stop them before they get anywhere near. What if they'd had a bomb in the back? Like the Beirut bombing. Then what? I mean, this is crazy. It's dangerous. And I'll be interested to hear what the investigation finds. But if you haven't heard that story, you should look it up. Distressing and amazing. But I got to go. You can go to edwarddentzel.com to find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. You can go to edwarddentzel.com/book, where you can download the first chapter of my next novel for free. It's called The Comebacks. You can find my shows also at SoundCloud, YouTube, Podomatic, Podbean. You can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. Find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Thank you for listening tonight. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.